rebels and troublemakers to stand out. Marginalized with voices making us so proud. For identity in the industry, we all shout. So many women empowered making their own.
Hi, I'm Cheryl L. Bedford, founder of the nonprofit organization Women of Color Unite and creator of the JTC List.
And I'm Roanna Reeper, Vice President of Women of Color Unite.
We released a podcast episode in which actress Roanna Renee recounted her story of experienced sexual battery at the hands of a former VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Sony Pictures Entertainment. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, please do so this one makes more sense.
It takes a leader, real activist we lean on. Militant, humility, woman meets the dream's heart, fighting for the voices of women seeing each spark.
We want to be mindful of others when discussing our next topic. This episode contains discussion of sexual harassment and battery.
On this bonus episode, we're joined by Dr. Akosua Lesesne. She is an educator, a leader in DEI space, and just one of the most brilliant women I have ever met in my entire life. And I am so pleased that I get to call her friend now. It's important to us that we have someone on our team who is not working in the entertainment industry or beholden to anyone in this space. Akosua was present during our conversation with the Sony executives and has guided us through every step that we have taken before, during, and since. Akosua, Dr. Akosua Lesesne, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
We're about to take the conversations that we have privately, publicly. So when it came time to really just talk about everything that happened with Roanna publicly, I really wanted to talk about the larger issue, which is #MeToo. The fact that it was started by Tarana Burke, a Black woman, 2006, I think you said. I know 10 years before Alyssa Milano tweeted it out. And it was specifically started for Black girls who had experienced sexual assault and sexual battery. Could you give us a little bit more background into Tarana Burke, why it was started, and how it still does actually help Black girls?
So for those who want to know about the Me Too movement as, separate from the hashtag and true to Tarana Burke's work, I know that we will have a link, but you can go to metoomovement.org, movement without the vowels, METOO. MVMT.org, and you can find Tarana Burke speaking and telling her story all over the internet. So I'm not meaning to speak for Tarana Burke, but what we know is that she has been in activist spaces since she was very, very young. You can also go and find that story. And then within those activist spaces, and she was the one who started using that hashtag in 2006 around this work to help Black girls, in particular Black women, heal from sexual assault. As I just mentioned earlier, she's still very much doing that work through her organization, separate from the hashtag that had been, I guess, temporarily co-opted. I don't know. But they are still very much doing that healing work for folks who are healing from sexual assault.
So let's get into Roanna's story. For our audience, what was your initial response when I told you, what had happened when you first heard about her story? Yeah, what was your initial response?
As the story unfolded, it just went deeper and deeper into shock, disappointment, being triggered myself because of the reminders of just how unsafe the world is for Black women. The folks who were and are, I guess, continue to be complicit. It is harrowing, because really there's been no justice, and she continues to live with this story, as does, certainly not to the degree that she does, but as does everyone, right? So all the secondary and tertiary trauma from witnessing just, I think, moral failures.
So for those who don't know, we did have this meeting with Sony. We had it with Stacy Green, who's basically their chief people's officer, and Paul Martin, the chief of diversity. On our side, on the WOCU side, it was me, Manon, Gregory Zide, our director of operations and treasurer, and Akosua. I knew we were going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, we're talking about Brett King, vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Sony Pictures. So it was really important for me to actually have a scholar on that call. So Koso actually wrote a report afterwards and talked about all the ways that basically they failed Roanna and Gil Jackson, who is a Black man who was the witness to some of what happened to Roanna. So let's get into this. So Akosua, your report, and you actually said it on the video call, the book, All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, and Some of Us Are Brave. So Akosua, let's talk about it.
That book is one of the foundational texts for the Black feminist movement, right? And, one thing that the Black feminist movement, or, as some people describe for themselves as how they engage the rights of Black women, is womanism, Black feminism, womanism. Not saying those are the same things, just saying those are two portals for folks to engage this idea of justice from the perspective and the worldview, and from the ethical worldview of Black women. So that text really, is one of the texts that points out that the activist movement, civil rights movement, really benefits all of us, and to a heightened degree benefits Black men, right? Because of the intersection with patriarchy. And of course, we know that the feminist movement, right? So I would say most of your listeners, know or have heard that Black women of color very quickly realized that the so-called feminist movement was really around white women, right? And the needs and the realities of white women, to the exclusion of very specific ways that Black women were being marginalized, right? And so, so I saw it, the moment we entered the virtual room, right? So Stacy is a white woman, and Paul Martin, is a Black man. I'll start the conversation by saying real people get harmed when folks in these positions are not skilled, are not knowledgeable, do not care, right? Really care about equity, about human beings, don't understand the various movements that have already taken place, don't understand the current context in which disabled folks, in which trans folks, in which queer folks, in which Black folks, in which dark-skinned Black folks, when there's not a depth of knowledge, these people who are already being harmed from being marginalized, it compounds the harm. And so I was just taken aback by what I experienced as a lack of urgency, a lack of, the kind of filler comments that felt very much like we were being blown off, right? It's the way that I, as a dark-skinned Black woman, interpreted my experience with this white woman and this light-skinned Black man. It felt very dismissive. It wasn't like they were engaging in true conversation. I didn't get a real sense that either had depth of knowledge, right, around sexual assault, around women's rights, around the disparate impact of all those things on Black women. And I didn't really get the sense that they were interested, right, in deepening their knowledge. Again, my experience, right, from being in the room with these folks. And that was shocking to me, right? So at one point, there was a comment made that just felt very flippant. And the comment was around like bad behavior or lack of discernment. And I had to say, no, what he did is illegal. it's not just bad behavior or lack of discernment, but it was that type of very dismissive, very shallow,
almost normalization of sorts.
Yeah. I mean, it was horrible. And as Cheryl mentioned, I'm not in the entertainment industry. I don't know how the entertainment industry works, but I do know what it feels like to be in the room with people who are deeply knowledgeable, with people who are urgent, with people who are treating me as if what I have to say is important. Because who am I? I mean, quite honestly, like, who am I to these two executives? And that's exactly how I felt. And so, I mean, oh well, right. But for myself, but not oh well for the folks whose lives and whose safety, right, depends upon them being knowledgeable and concerned and reflective and urgent and knowing the laws, like knowing the difference between lack of discernment and bad behavior and stuff that's illegal.
I remember being on that call with you and the fact that the only thing they were like, well, they wanted Brett to, I guess he wanted to apologize to them privately. Like, that was it. Child. I'm like, okay, so first of all, I said I will take that back to them, but I know what their answer will be. Like that,
Right.
it was a dismissal of what he had done and the
Very
effects on Roanna. Like it's always like we're just supposed to get over it, right? Like we're just supposed to get over it and move on. Not taking into consideration that she's in therapy, not taking into consideration what the harm that was done to Gil. As a Black man standing up for a Black woman, right? Isn't that what we ask? That's what we ask. And he did.
Yeah.
And, got text messages trying to get him to change his story. And there was no accountability.
Right.
There was no accountability. And the fact that they said, well, this isn't a Sony event. God, this is Hollywood. We all leave with our fucking titles. He used his title. Have y'all checked out Twitter? And people who do some outrageous fucking shit and people tag their job and the job's like, yeah, we don't want anything to do with them. But you doing mental gymnastics. So, wait, what are we talking about? I remember when we got off the call and you basically sent a report and you're like, Black women don't stand a chance with y'all. Like our safety, like we don't stand a chance. And we're talking about the chief diversity officer of Sony Pictures. And I think Stacey's like second in line. Like she's a chief people's officer. Black women don't stand a fucking chance.
Not a chance in hell. So hearing the story, right, and just how boldly this sexual assault occurred is obviously traumatizing, right? Not nearly as traumatizing as experiencing it, but just like, oh my gosh, like this is how we moving out here. This is what we doing. The second kind of phase of just shock and horror for me was that phone call.
Right.
What they're demonstrating for me is the skill set, the depth of knowledge, the human compassion. Like this is the level of knowledge, skill, and compassion that folks charged with making these decisions, these real life decisions, right? For people, because what we're now calling DEI impacts real people's lives in real ways. And I was terrified. Because I'm certain that like, it's not, yes, Black women don't stand a chance. Like that was definitely my takeaway. And also lots of folks don't stand a chance. I was underwhelmed and terrified all at the same time.
So how do you kind of like, given this conversation and what you have seen from Hollywood DEI until this point. Like, how do you kind of feel about how DEI is practiced in like the entertainment space as a whole?
How I see DEI practice in the entertainment space as a whole is not really different than how DEI is practiced, especially has been practiced since the rebellion in every field. I'm going to get at this in a couple different ways. So what I will say is, Cheryl mentioned that I had said that this field was built on the scholarship, on the activism, on the sweat, on the, on the ingenuity, on the courage, on the love and compassion of Black people, and a core of whom have been Black women, right, since the 60s. And before this podcast, I kind of went back and looked at some of those texts, some of those things that I'm referring to. They did not at all call themselves DEI, right? So that even just like branding it, right? So we're going to brand this thing, right? It was compassion. It was activism. It was courage. It was social justice. It was liberation, right? These ideas that came forth about how we should be in this nation that was stolen, the land that was stolen from Indigenous folks and the Black folks who were kidnapped, right, and terrorized for all this time, right? So let's, it wasn't this pretty, cute little language that we put on it. So just know that when I say DEI, I'm not at all talking about what it has become, right? These cute little package languages. So I'm talking about folks who've done this thinking in this depth of activism, right? And so Cheryl had mentioned the 1960s, but even starting with Sojourner Truth's speech, "Ain't I, quote unquote, ain't I a woman?" And I have a story about that, right? That was in 1851. Right. So really just thinking about how can we share resources in this nation among folks, given our history of genocide and exploitation and enslavement, et cetera, et cetera. So that for me is when I say that DEI is based off of those things, that's what I'm talking about. Now, interesting thing about the "Ain't I a Woman" speech is that Sojourner Truth never said, "Ain't I a woman?" Sojourner Truth spoke multiple languages. She was from the Northeast, right? And so it was a white abolitionist who went back because she thought that it would be catchier, right, to put her words in what she was claiming was Southern vernacular. So even then, beginning to co-opt and to, I won't even say whitewash. It was like, this is your idea of Blackness, that you only think that nothing against Southern vernacular. I'm a Southerner, right? And so some of the most brilliant things have been delivered in Southern vernacular. But you deciding that you're going to take what this woman said, this orator, formerly enslaved orator, who speaks multiple languages, you're going to take what she said and you think that the nation can only accept her words in what you're claiming to be Southern vernacular, which also, like, I'm Southern for many generations on both sides. I ain't never heard somebody say, "Ain't I?" Like, I don't know that that's even the way my grandmother would say that, right? And she speaks fully, Southern Black American vernacular, right? And so anyway, I'm glad we brought that up because that's just an example of this continued tradition of let's take Black people's words, Black people's ideas, Black people's ideals, ignore what they're saying, ignore what they're saying will work, ignore what they're saying when what we're saying when we say, this is how we get free. And you deciding in all your whiteness that you know better than we do. That you can reinterpret what we're doing better than we can, that you know our history better than we do, that you know what's going to work better than what the history has told you works as far as getting folks free. And so what I will say around what I saw at DEI, not just in the entertainment industry, but around the nation, it was very telling. It was very telling. So before I say what I'm going to say, I do think it's important to say that there are Black folks who absolutely have taken these positions, who are in these positions in every field, who absolutely have a depth of knowledge, have a level of compassion, really are social justice and liberation minded. So don't hear me as this being an attack on those individuals who saw these positions as an opportunity to say, oh yeah, I'm moving the ball forward. Right. And more than likely, the ones who get fired or have to leave are the ones who are actually trying to do the work, quite honestly, because that's not what the system is designed for. Right. The system is designed to say, oh, shit, they're rioting in the streets and they may burn this down. I have an idea. Let's not end police murder. Let's not end state-sanctioned murder. Let's not end police brutality. Let's give them a DEI position. Right? Let's, and that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. And so, and many people knew that. Many people saw that, right? As, oh, this is what you're giving us instead of giving us responding to our calls of justice, right? Speaking specifically of the entertainment industry, let's reboot old Black shows. Right? It's like nobody asked for that. So all types of shenanigans was happening, right? In the face of George Floyd's lynching and Breonna Taylor's murder. So let's give all these things that none of them are asking for, because we're definitely not going to give them justice. That's not what this project is about. Right? Mm-hmm. Like the white power structure must continue to stand in these folks' eyes. Lots of people knew that, right? That wasn't a secret. Folks of all educational backgrounds, we knew that that's what was happening. The curious thing for me was not the folks who went in knowing that this was happening, doing the analysis and wanting to push the ball forward, who are likely the people who got fired, right? Who get fired, not just in this latest headline, but just in general, right? We know that that's the cycle. But the people who went in a very self-serving, anti-Black, arrogant manner, the people who raised their hands first, oh, DEI, I'm a DEI specialist. Really? Because you have a degree in archaeology. Right? And you're a DEI specialist. That was very telling to me. And you all know that one of the things I talk about is colorism, right? So there absolutely was a color dynamic, color dynamic to that. There absolutely is a class dynamic, right? It's telling around who we have become as a people and what some of us are willing to do when given the opportunity. Some of us are willing to be the token. Some of us are willing to be the face of this very insincere movement for our own personal gain. And that's not social justice. That's not liberation. That's not Black to me. We always say Blackness is not a monolith. And it's true, because there are some Black folks who I don't recognize based on the ideals that I was raised in as a Southern Black American woman, right? If it's not collective, it ain't Black to me, because our destinies are intertwined with each other. Just because I move out of a certain neighborhood or move into a certain neighborhood and have a certain car and have a certain salary for now, this notion that I am somehow separate from other Black people in this country is ridiculous. It's ahistorical. There is no scholarship that supports that. There's no practical knowledge that supports that. The other crazy part is that you have people moving this way. Again, I want to emphasize that true DEI, what we're calling DEI, should come with depth of knowledge. Depth of knowledge about the laws that you are that you're supposed to be upholding, depth of knowledge about the ideas and theories and concepts that have come before you, depth of knowledge about the history. Just as an example, there's some people who are like, oh, I was the first Black person to do so-and-so. Ma'am, it's 2023. Ain't nobody the first Black person to do nothing, right? Your history book told you that. But when you get into this field, do you actually want to, can you just look back? Or again, this notion right here, standing flat-footed in 2023, have a new idea about how to get us free. Ain't picked up now a history book. Can't tell you about one boycott, right? Not just the boycott you see on the movies, but how was it organized? Who was the front person? How was it funded? What did you do in the face of violence, right? Have none of that information, but can still say, I am the one who knows how to turn it around on this very shallow knowledge. As an educator, it's wild to me. We are not in Kansas anymore, Toto. Like, these people really, like, y'all are dangerous and anti-intellectual and self-serving. You have a better racial analysis than Frederick Douglass did? You think you have a better idea and you're more capable than Harriet Tubman was? Than Assata Shakur? So what Assata Shakur says is nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who were oppressing them. So you're going to come in and say, oh, but if I just appeal to their moral judgment, and so you know better than Assata Shakur? I'm here to say, I don't know better than my ancestors. What I can do is read and deepen my knowledge and understand and look at the analysis and the political framework that they've already put forward to see what has worked, see what hasn't worked. But these folks, like, you really are out here proposing ideas that Assata Shakur told you do not work. I'm not more knowledgeable than Assata Shakur. I'm sorry. I'm not going to put myself on the line and say that.
So now everybody knows why Akosua was our head of education. As of today, Manon, I want you to take down DEIAB. She's the head of depth of knowledge. That is what we're going to call it. So Akosua, we have been trying to figure out what to rename DEI because of the fact that it has been so bastardized. And we have been thinking about this and you just said it. It's depth of knowledge, right? Because of the fact we're talking about depth of knowledge about all of the isms, depth of knowledge about the history of sexual assault, depth of knowledge, because I have said this multiple times. If we actually had people like you running DEI and gave them some money, we could change some shit, but they're not going to do it.
Well, that's not what they want.
So the best we can do, they're not going to do it. But it is depth of knowledge. This anti-intellectualism that has permeated our society. What, did we think wasn't going to permeate Black people? Did we think that it wasn't going to permeate DEI? And then there's the other thing, and it's Akosua, is what you and I talk about. You will never be able to separate me from my people. I have had people who tried to pat me on the head. I have had people who have tried to get me to back down. Cheryl, you're the good one. What the fuck does that mean? Cheryl, you're different from the rest. Cheryl, blah, 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 blah. You are never going to get me to separate from my people. Point blank. End of story. That my mother taught me that. But y'all can't do that. Y'all can't undo what Joan Teresa Curtis did, which was to instill me a connection to all my people. I'm never going to think that I am better than someone else. Well, I am better than some of y'all who are out here with that anti-Blackness bullshit and separating yourself from your people. But even that being said, I have said before, I can let y'all go and still fight for you. Right? Like, I can let y'all go and still fight for you, whether you like it or not, because you're still Black. You know what I'm saying? So the work that I'm doing is still going to benefit you, even though the work you're doing ain't going to necessarily benefit all our people. But
it's going to harm us. Yeah, it's going to harm us.
It's the dangerous part. And the more that we went through with Roanna's story, the people who betrayed us, the people I reached out for help and turned their backs on us, the people who were willing to throw her under the bus for the greater cause, all of that. Like, y'all out here, y'all fucking dangerous. I'm literally fighting for our lives, my life. And y'all out here like wanting to pussyfoot around with some white supremacist bullshit. Uphold the system. Do whatever you can do to hold on to what little bit of power within that system that you have, except the firings and all the people letting go. Like, it didn't work.
I'm on a battlefield and you're on the playground. Right? If this is just something that is kind of fairly interesting, something you're doing to support, your identity development and I'm just going to go out, and then you go back safely to your home where you don't, face the dangers that I face, or you don't face them to the same extent. You're not as vulnerable, whether it's vulnerable financially, vulnerable, socially, or in other ways. It's like you come out here and do this work around like activism and, anti-Blackness. And it's like, I'm fighting for my life and you're fighting for a spot on the merry-go-round. I'm on a battlefield and you're on a playground. We're not the same. Now, if Assata Shakur came to that conclusion, I'm going to believe Assata Shakur. I'm not going to be out here like, oh, well, if we just talk nice to them. I don't know better than Assata Shakur. And I mean, and I guess you do, but I don't. Show me one example in history where we've quote unquote blown it up from the inside. There's not a historical example. It's a genuine question. If your listeners have an example, a historical example where we've quote unquote blown it up from the inside, please comment, please, because I want to learn. Right? But to my knowledge, there is not one historical example of blowing it up from the inside. What one of my elders says, they are comfortable at their level of captivity. They know that they're captive, but they're comfortable at their level of captivity. And so they're going to protect their level of captivity. Damn everyone else whose level of captivity is more dangerous and more life-threatening, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of it is self-preservation. Part of it is anti-Blackness, that you could really be out here, talking, looking in the face of Black folks, saying, going back to our meeting with Sony, be like, well, I've done so-and-so, right? So it's anti-Blackness, is that no matter what we've done, no matter what we've accomplished, no matter how many libraries, volumes of our accomplishments can fill, you still think that you can, that not even that you do know, but it's possible that you can know more than our collective knowledge and wisdom and experiences, not having read a damn thing. But not only is it anti-Blackness, but then it's like this false sense of this internalized superiority on your part and anti-intellectual. So it's a lot. There's a lot happening.
These are the people in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are the people who are in charge of hiring people at major entertainment companies, which then affects what we see. Now it affects the content that is made, the movies, the television shows, gaming, whatever it is. Neither of them saw the humanity in Roanna, saw the humanity in me, saw the humanity in you, because you could run fucking circles around them. And the thing that this white woman would actually like open her mouth to compare, that means they did not see our humanity. No wonder they had him as a VP of DEI.
There are Black people who will betray Black people, right? That's, and again, speaking specifically of Black American history, right? Like we've known that since enslavement. In schools, we don't learn about all the rebellions that the enslaved people here in the United States actually started. Like we don't learn about those rebellions, right? It's not in our textbooks. There was one teacher who said to middle school students, a middle school teacher I taught with, he said, no, for every day of enslavement, there was a day of rebellion. Right? But we don't learn history that way because it doesn't serve the white power structure to say, no, these people fought back, right? It wasn't just like, oh, we just enslaved them for 246 years. These folks fought back, right? So we don't know about all those rebellions. But what we do know is that, yes, for every day of enslavement, there's a day of rebellion. And for every rebellion, there are Negroes willing to run to massa and be like, oh, they trying to leave. The white power structure is frightening. What happens psychologically surviving the many, 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 many nuances and machinations of the white power structure, right? And so from the beginning of time, we've had Black people who get afraid when we get free. They're afraid of what might happen. So that's very common. And, we don't have to go to the plantation, right? To, people on our jobs, right? When a bunch of Black folks get together and say, oh, we're going to go tell the boss. So quite honestly, I don't think there's been one instance where you've come to me and said, so-and-so did so-and-so. And I've been like, oh, not so-and-so, right? Like I feel like,
you know what it is? I keep trying. I keep hope. I keep hope alive.
Hope is a horrible strategy. We can joke about this because, we all have our different points of entry, our different ways of being, right? And, but no, one thing that has kept me healthy, what I believe is healthy as a person can be in these here yet to be United States, is being rooted in reality. Like, yeah, I know this person is saying that they're an ally, but again, history tells me that it's not likely. My common sense tells me that it's not likely. My intuition tells me that it's not likely. My pride in who I am and my determination to survive, right? Because that's the other thing is that, these folks are playing in our faces. I mean, like, oh, well, yes, I'm diversity. I'm so-and-so. And and doing very dangerous things. And here's the thing for me. I came here to live and to thrive. And I'm not going to succumb to anybody of any color who is going to threaten my thriving. Whatever the reasons are that folks engage in this very duplicitous weirdness that's happening, I'm not going to sit by quietly and allow you to harm me. And people should know that I'm not the only one who believes that, right? It becomes a question of dignity. It becomes a question of survival. And so, yeah, you can play this little identity game if you want to. Whatever's driving this stuff that you're doing, you can do that. Also know that folks are going to stand up for themselves. Folks are going to push back. And I'm definitely one of those people. I'm not here to play along with that.
Like those people do that. You ain't my people. And I'm going to call you out in dealing with my people and fighting for my people. Because you just are really about your fucking self. And I saw that, like, the text message between Roanna and Brett. You did this to me. He never says he didn't do it. Sir, you took it the wrong way. What the fuck does that mean? Like, message. Because I knew if we, as an organization, without the funding, without all of that, if we were going to take on something, like, girl, I had to bring every receipt. And the way that people dismiss it, and it's really because they just don't see our humanity. Our humanity as Black people, and our humanity specifically as Black women. But on a much happier note, I got you. I always say that I'm off in my corner doing my own thing. But what people fail to realize when I say that I'm off in my own corner is my own corner are filled with people who actually have critical thinking skills. My own corner are filled with people like Akosua and Manon and all of those people. Like, my corner, like, we actually have a really, really good time. There is a picture of you and Akosua and Sarah dancing at the colorism panel, like that joy. When I talk about I'm in my own corner is actually filled with dancing and laughing and a lot of joy and, yeah, a lot of sorrow. And these are the people who help to pick me up off the ground. And I hope they can count on me. So I don't want people to think, because I think sometimes when I say that, people are like, oh, she's alone in her corner. Oh, baby, I'm not alone. I'm just over there with the people who actually really are working for our benefit.
I just, would encourage us to know more, to read more, right? To watch more films and to know who we are more deeply. Because one thing that Toni Morrison says is we wouldn't even be here if Black people didn't know how to fight back. Do you know how violent and all-consuming the white power structure is? We wouldn't even be sitting here if we didn't already have the knowledge available to us. And so I just encourage us to ensure that our actions today are influenced by that knowledge that has been amassed.
Akosua, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you for advising me on the work that we do. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize how much of what I say and do comes from you being my friend, you sharing your knowledge so incredibly freely with me. I love you. Okay, folks. So this fight is not over. The stories of Black women were largely ignored during the #MeToo movement, and they continue to be swept under the rug. #MeToo was created by a Black woman, and it is time that Black women and other women of color reclaim this narrative. Our stories, our pain, is as important as others. People need to see us as human. And we know this won't be the last time we need to advocate on behalf of women of color in the industry, which has historically let predators roam wild.
Yeah, there's really so much work ahead of us. Either way, that's it for this episode.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode. If you or someone you know has been sexually harassed, battered, or assaulted, please reach out for help to the National Sexual Assault Hotline, 1-800-656-4673. 1-800-656-4673. Please speak to someone today.
As a premium subscriber, you get access to our Hot Tea Premium segment, as well as the video version of this podcast. You can find the Spotify subscription link in the show notes. And if you're listening through the Spotify app, be sure to cast your vote on the poll and leave a comment or question in the Q&A. The Women of Color Unite podcast is produced by Nwabata Nnani and edited by Lauren Bonett. The music is by Oh Yeah, featuring Nayuta. Subscribe to the Women of Color Unite podcast to never miss an episode. If you want to submit questions or responses to this episode, either written or a voice note, you can send them to podcast@wokunite.com. Find the show notes and transcripts for this podcast on our website, wokunite.org, where you can also learn more about Women of Color Unite and sign up to become a member for free if you haven't yet, or sign up for our monthly newsletter. Please consider making a tax-deductible donation. Donations are what enable us to create amazing programs like our #StartWith8 career development program. If you're on social media, you can follow the podcast at WOCU Podcast, and you can follow Women of Color Unite at WOCUnite.org. Follow Manon, myself, at Manon the Reeper, and Cheryl at Cheryl_CLBP.
Please stay tuned and join us for the next episode of the Women of Color Unite podcast, because we telling it like it is.
We need rebels and troublemakers to stand out, marginalized with voices making us so proud for identity in the industry. We all shout, so many women empowered making their own route.
Like ageism, racism, sexism.
Uncovered, they get together to form a force to prove the one that ain't gotta have a child to be seen as a mother. I'm saying,
All power
to the women of color. Yeah. It's just a salute to Cheryl Bedford, leading activist in the community. She's bridging the gap and bringing all women together to fight for real inclusion amongst all the diversities. Keep going.